What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review. It's our weekly show where we review the Magic stories as they're posted on Wizards' website, or it's not, because for the next few weeks it's not. At least according to the only information that we have, is that this is what we're going to be doing for the next few weeks until October 10th, which is when the Guilds of Ravnica stories are going to begin. And so for this week, what we decided that we wanted to do, we just finished up the Vivian Reed stories. This past Sunday was when you guys had the video, when we put it out. The story came out Friday. And so now what we're going to do is we're just going to close off 2019, or the core set 2019, and the Vivian Reed stories. There were two separate sets of stories here, a block of 8 stories and a block of 3 stories, and we're going to talk about them. We're going to talk about what worked, what didn't work, and kind of where we're at this point. So, to start it off, let's talk about what I just mentioned in the beginning, the Vivian Reed stories. Vivian Reed stories were good. We enjoyed them. I encourage you to go back and watch those videos, especially since, like I said, there's going to be a bit of a drought for a little while, so...
If you have read the stories, you can watch the video.
Well, I mean...
Please read the stories.
Right, and I mean, in the videos, we encourage you to do that as well, so...
It does really help
Yes.
to even understand what we're talking about, but also to allow you to come to your own conclusions instead of just depending on our opinions to inform you about the story. That's not what it's intended for.
Well, and especially with our discussions this week, like, we want people's opinions, people's informed opinions about the M19 stories and the Vivian Reed stories and the world that they live in, because this is kind of the week, this is the show or the episode where we get to kind of extrapolate out from that. We're not just going to work within the bounds of the story, we're going to work within the stories and kind of what's been going on around them in the world of Magic and stuff like that, so that we can talk about that and we can see if it worked, if it didn't work, etc., like I said. And so, for example, with the Vivian Reed stories, we discussed a few weeks ago communication issues and the fact that we weren't told when the Vivian Reed stories were going to be coming out because Wizards had given an exclusive to, I don't know, generic geek-themed magazine or online article place where they were like, oh, there are Vivian Reed stories coming out. We knew there were Vivian Reed stories coming out.
Yeah.
But because they gave the exclusive to a company and I guess signed a contract or an agreement or something, and this is an assumption on my part, I don't know this, but presumably there was some kind of an agreement with that organization that they would allow that organization to break that news and not Wizards of the Coast breaking it, yet they had told us that the stories existed. We knew they were coming, we just didn't know when. And so when a bunch of people asked, hey, could you tell us when the stories are coming out? There was nothing. No information whatsoever. Not even a, sorry, we can't tell you yet, keep an eye on our affiliates.
Yeah.
Which would have made sense. It would have been like, oh, you're giving an exclusive to somebody. That makes sense. That's, businesses do that. You want partnerships. You want, because that business then understands that, hey, if Magic does this frequently enough, then Magic fans, are at least a subset of them, are going to begin to follow our articles to find out if and when we release information on these upcoming things for Magic the Gathering. It's a great way to blend fandoms. Because the other thing is, the people that are fans of that blog or article website are also now seeing articles on Magic the Gathering. And if they see like, oh, there's stories coming out, maybe they didn't know that stories existed for Magic. They just thought it was a trading card game that maybe got made fun of on South Park that one time. You know, like, and honestly, because there are some people that that's the extent of their knowledge of Magic the Gathering. Maybe they know someone who plays or are aware of the card's existence, right? There's a whole spectrum of people, geeks and non-geeks, who think one thing or another when they hear the words Magic the Gathering. So, exclusives make sense, is what I'm saying. What I am not saying is that because you have an exclusive, that you can just ignore your fan base. Because that's the way to make it so that those exclusives don't matter and those companies are going to start not caring, because if we don't care, then people aren't going to share those articles and go read them if they don't care about the stories and that's all that the articles are reporting on. You've made yourself the focal point of us in terms of where we look to find out about the stories. And now you're like, oh, well, there are also these other entities. Then tell us that.
Right.
Because it wouldn't be that hard, and again, if there was an agreement, which I have no proof, this is just an assumption, based on the fact that the article came out and then Wizards retweeted the article and that's where we got that information from. That's where my head goes in terms of what happened. If that's the case, why not say, sorry, we can't tell you when the release date of the Vivian Reed stories are, but check with, again, insert website here. I genuinely don't. I'm not trying to be catty here by being like, I'm not even going to say their name. I genuinely don't remember who it was. Because they've had a couple of different organizations that they've given exclusive information to, or seemingly exclusive information. Like these other entities that have been able to break these stories or preview cards, outside of their regular purview of what kinds of things they do. And so I don't know the entity, which, to be fair, means that that's bad. Again, that's just me, and maybe I don't care enough, but I don't know. I didn't know who that entity was. I don't remember.
If that is the case, that they gave these rights over to a certain company for exclusivity purposes, it's simply bad marketing. Because in this day and age, it no longer makes sense. It was a good way to market things before the internet and social media was the way to get information across to people. Now that it is, that method of marketing doesn't make sense anymore, because now you have online creators trying to make videos and do other things based on the information that you're supposed to be providing them, and you're not. And that's not only hurting the creators, that's also hurting your fan base, because your fan base are the fans of those creators. And now you're really telling no one what's happening. So your fans are going to get bored and go find something else to do with their time. And your creators are going to get upset and possibly find more lucrative things to do with their time. I'm sorry, but in a modern age, that form of marketing just isn't gonna work anymore. It's just not.
And it's a damn shame, because the Vivian Reed stories were good. Overall, I would argue that they were great. I mean, They were definitely, in my opinion, they were definitely better overall than Dominaria stories. I would think that they had a little bit of an edge over the M19 stories, although I also enjoyed the M19 stories. But I thought the Vivian Reed stories were great. I thought that they worked out well as a 3-story arc. It was shorter than an 8-story or a 12-story arc like M19 and Dominaria respectively.
But it also found a way to well-roundedly tell those stories in 3 short stories. It did not feel rushed. It did not feel like things had been left out.
Which is typically the final story blunder that we've dealt with in the past.
In fact, quite the opposite. It it included so much extra, but not in a way that I would say was detrimental to it, which has also been a problem in the past, where they've just drawn it out and drawn it out and drawn it out, that by the end you're like, okay, well, you know, the main conflict hasn't even happened yet, but I can't care anymore.
Cough, Dominaria, cough.
You know? Yes.
It was. And again, we talked about it. Go back and watch the reviews. We said that.
So, I mean, this time around, I think the stories were really well done, because the first story had a lot of intrigue and a lot of things that were unexpected, a lot of historical references. The second story was much more sort of your typical movie dichotomy kind of a thing.
Villain hero banter, etc.
Right, and also kind of reference back to the Ixalan stories a little bit, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sort of the Veraska, you know, abuses and prison life kind of aspects. And then you had the third story, which again was a completely separate entity, with a lot of action, right? A lot of just awesomeness. But you didn't read these three stories and say, hey, there was no cohesion. It didn't make sense. No, it did have cohesion. It did have through lines. It did make sense as all one story. But they were each their own story in their own right, and they were each complete, full stories. It did not feel, like I said before, like they were rushed or unfinished or trying to do too many different things in one story. And these are all problems we've consistently had in the past.
Well, and it's interesting that you bring that up, because Cassandra herself, the author of the Vivian Reed stories, mentioned that it was a full story that then needed to be cut up into 3 parts, and some people felt that there was a bit of a misstep with the cutting up of story 2, either where it began or where it ended, in terms of fully fleshing out that story in comparison to the other ones. Now, this discussion
I disagree with that more.
See, well, I was going to say, this discussion happened before part 3 was released.
Okay.
But it was a discussion that was brought up to Cassandra, and it was like, hey, you know, they probably told her to break it up, and she said that she kind of, you know, she felt that it might have been a misstep. And again, I hope I'm not misquoting, so please feel free to look on Twitter, check on her Twitter and see what she exactly said. I genuinely do not mean to misquote if I have, but there was, like I said, there was a discussion on cutting up those stories, and if there might have been a misstep, and her feeling like she could have done it differently in some way, to have cut it or kind of embellished in the beginnings and the ends, whatever she meant by that, to better bolster the second story as you mentioned, a full story in and of itself.
See, I completely disagree with that sentiment, and here's why. Because if you look at the 3 stories as a unit, and if you look at them separately, I don't see enough of a blending together to be able to look at the 3 stories as a unit and say, yes, they were once one story that was chopped into 3.
Mm-hmm.
I see 3 separate standalone stories with vastly different aspects of how they are told and what they are about.
Fair point.
So to me, it wouldn't make sense to cut them any other way.
Mm-hmm. That's fair. And okay, now let's talk about we were kind of talking about this before. We are putting this video out on Thursday, when JaAR would typically be coming out, because we put out part 3 on Sunday, as I mentioned earlier, why did we have to put JaAR out on Sunday? I mean, to be fair, the correct answer is we should have put it out Saturday, but, life happens. But regardless, we put it out on Sunday / should have been Saturday because part 3 came out Friday. And again, I have said this a million times, and I feel like I'm one of the only ones who is saying it. My partner sitting next to me aside. I feel like I'm one of the few who comments on it. Why? Why does preview season so undercut your stories? Why? Focus on one thing at a time.
Yeah. Please.
And the stories, part 3 was great. It was my favorite of the 3. And you put it out on a Friday. And then don't put something out, at least announced story-wise, on the following Wednesday when you would normally have a story coming out. I get it. Guilds of Ravnica is a big deal. I'm super excited for it. I'm enjoying watching the previews come out. And I'm enjoying watching, as Amy mentioned earlier, those content creators following all of those people who get those preview cards and talking about them. There are certain content creators who what they do when preview season comes around is they follow all of those different people, compile all of that information, and then bring it to all of us, to all of you. We are not those people because that's not really what we focus on as much. But we've talked about spoilers in the past a while ago, I think like Ether Revolt or something like that. But we talked about it in the realm of Vorthos spoilers and what that means. And
because that's a thing too, although people like to act like it's not, I guess.
Right. But I feel like it just always feels like the stories are secondary. And again, the stories don't make the money. The cards do. I get that. Which is why a novel is coming out. You know what sells or what makes money? Novels. You know what doesn't? Free web content. I get that.
But you know what doesn't make money? Novels. When what people are expecting is to be able to get it for free online.
Well, and so what they've said...
if they can't do that, they're not going to shell out the cash for it.
And I am not a hypocrite, at least to my, best efforts. I'm not a hypocrite. I will give credit where credit is due. People asked, and Wizards responded. The Ravnica novel will be in conjunction with online stories that are released. Seemingly, based on what they said, it is not the same content, it is different content, but at least there will still be weekly story releases for whatever the name of the third Ravnica set is, which at the time of filming has not been revealed yet. So we will find out what that is when they decide to tell us. But that novel is, I think, a test. I think it's a test of, let's see how well it sells. Let's see how well it sells. Let's see if it's worth trying to do it again. From people who are much more well-read than I have seen people excited for, I believe his name is Greg Weisman, and for him writing the Ravnica story. Kaya, Ghost Assassin, is on the front of that story. I am on the cover of that book. I am intrigued as to why she is on the cover of that book. And I would be even more intrigued, and I think it would be a good idea for them, if Kaya did not in any way show up in the online stories, which gives you that much more of a reason to want to purchase the book, because, hey, Kaya's on the cover. Do you want to know why Kaya's on the cover? Guess you're going to have to buy the book and read it.
And that's just the thing. I mean, at that point, they're going to force you to buy the book if you want to know the whole story. Because they're going to have different information online
Mm-hmm.
than what's in the books.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so, we'll read the stories that they have online and we'll do reviews about them. But if we want to actually understand the entirety of that story, we're going to have to buy a book.
Well, and the interesting thing that I want to know is, in what order are they meant to be read? And I would hope that that information will come out to us. Are we supposed to read like chapters 1 through 3 before we read part 1 of the third set stories? And then chapters 4 through 6 before we read part 2? You know what I mean? Like, is there a breakdown? Should we read all of the third set stories before we read the book? Should we read the book before we read the third set stories? That's kind of where that falls a little flat for me. And again, we are far out from that. That is next year at this point. April of next year, I believe, when that is happening.
Yeah, but I mean, I just really don't like the fact that not only now are we spending money on product, now we're spending money on the stories too, just so that we can make any of the videos that we need to make for our channel. And that's a problem because we don't make money from putting videos up on our channel.
We will be okay. I hear what you're saying. We will be okay monetarily, but past that, I agree with you. I think that I want to know what happens in these stories because we have been following along with the Gatewatch story all along. We've only been doing reviews since Shadows over Innistrad, but we read Battle for Zendikar together. We read Oath of the Gatewatch together. We were aware of the stories regarding Magic Origins together. So the Gatewatch story, arguably beginning to end, at least as the entity known as the Gatewatch, we've got. And now this is the end of the Gatewatch stories. And so if we want to, as I think Amy was alluding to, if we want to get all of what we can out of the Gatewatch's story, we can continue to read the online stories as they have been from start to finish of the Gatewatch stories. They have been online semi-weekly releases. And now there is also a novel, which they moved away from for a very particular reason. Presumably, because they are a business, that reason referenced money in some way.
The reason referenced the digital age. People don't buy thick books anymore and spend, $70 on them.
Oh, it's definitely not 70. I think it's
whatever it
right.
is.
I think it's like 20 or 30.
Oh, okay. That's not that bad.
It's not.
But still, like if you want to know these stories consistently, that money adds up.
Well, right, and I mean it's problematic only because we don't. Right now, it's unknown. It's change, and the internet hates change. But besides that, besides the kind of sarcasticness of that statement, it's unknown at this point, and that's a problem. You're announcing a book, a novel that you're releasing regarding your stories, and there are a lot of questions that surround it. And again, credit where it is due, they have been answering those questions. They have. But those questions are going to keep coming, right? I mean, I feel like came up with 3 or 4 just sitting here. And every time I come up with a question, I have to go back on Twitter and tweet at Wizards_Magic or at Blake and be like, what about this question? What about this question? To be frank, I get it that that's how those questions are going to be answered, because otherwise I'm just coming here and being like, I don't know the answer to this question. It's like, just ask it. But I would feel like such an annoying asshole if every day I'm just like, here's my new question. Here's my new question. Like, I just feel like this is going to sound really entitled. That's a lot of work to fully understand the implications behind the decision that company has made. And I feel like it should be something that we should know about better.
Yeah, I think that they're spending a lot of time complaining about how small the Vorthos audience is. And I think what they're doing is proving why it is so small. I think what they're doing is trying to milk us for money without realizing that doing things that way is only going to deter more people than it brings in.
Well, I was going to say, I agree and disagree with that idea. I think, and again, no inside information, this is just my gut feeling about this, especially based on the Future of the Magic Story podcast or video that we reviewed a few weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago at this point. They said in that, as Amy referenced, that the community of people that read the stories online are a small number of their fan base. Now, in comparison to their entire fan base, I think that's correct. But in general, as a member of that fan base, I was a little offended by the way that they said it, because they said it in a way of being like, there aren't a lot of them, so we need to find other ways of doing this to try to find more people. And it's like, so we're
Instead
not
of saying,
good enough? I don't
right.
Get it.
The way they went about saying it was not the most professional.
No. And especially because they said it multiple times in different ways.
Like, well, that shittily small Vorthos fan base, am I right?
And the other discussion that is poignant when talking about this is the fact that to be a Vorthos fan, some Vorthos fans are fans of the stories, and that is great. We love those kinds of fans. Wizards might. I'm not saying that they hate you. I don't know that. What I'm saying is they might not enjoy those fans, and they might have a reason to not enjoy those fans. And the reason is because it doesn't cost them anything to read and enjoy those stories.
Right.
At all. You can be a fan of the Vorthos stories, of the magic stories that are released online. You can go online once a week and read those stories. Hell, you can go online once a week and listen to the Voice of All podcast. And again, or video. That is not a knock on the Voice of All podcast. I think they do a great job. But what it means is now you're not even going to the Wizards website for the story. You're going and listening to a well voice acted story. So again, not at all shade at Voice of All. They do a great job. What I'm saying is, from the standpoint of Wizards of the Coast, the company that they are, if the only way that you interact with Wizards of the Coast is to read their stories on their website and or consume them in a different way, listen to summaries on YouTube, listen to someone else reading the story out loud as like an audio drama kind of a thing, none of that makes Wizards money. And if that's the case, I cannot fault them for looking at that and going, we don't make money off of this. We need to fix this. I'm not happy about it, but they're a business.
Yeah, but you have to understand too, we're spending money on cards. I mean...
We are.
What I'm saying is, we're spending money on cards because there's value.
Mm-hmm.
Cards appreciate. These books will not do that. These books will be worth their MSRP until they no longer are, because nobody wants them.
Except, again, agreed but disagree. The old Magic stories, if you look for book versions of those stories online, you are going to get shafted in terms of the price.
I
disagree. Like that's provable. You can go online and look for...
when we were looking for the Time Spiral books, we were warned that they were going to be very few and far between. And yes, it was a little difficult to find them maybe, but when I did, they were a damn good price.
The Time Spiral books were. I'm talking about older than that. I'm talking about original...
To me, that's pretty old.
No. I'm talking about much older than that. It is
Yeah, well.
provable. You can go online and look for the Brothers War books or the Thran books, etc. They are...
So just save them for 30 years and then they'll be worth something.
Well, and you run into what Magic has run into, right? It's interesting, the parallels there. The old Magic books are now worth a ton of money, whereas the more recent Magic novels, like the Time Spiral block of novels, are not. And this Ravnica novel likely will not be, for the same reason that if you have a box of Gatecrash that you bought because you were like, oh my god, alpha boxes now are thousands of dollars. If you had a sealed alpha box, you could sell it and put a down payment on a house. Buy a car. Right? Because of that, people now are going, man, if we just save up sealed boxes of Magic, we'll be rich.
Not
No.
if everybody does it, because if everybody does it, then guess what? It's a flooded market when everybody starts thinking, oh, this is coming to a mature enough age where it should be worth something. But if everybody all had the same idea, guess what? It ain't worth nothing.
Right. Now, to be fair, boxes of Future Sight are worth well more than MSRP because the pull rates on original Future Sight Tarmogoyfs are up there because it was just a rare. So you could pull Tarmogoyfs in Future Sight 2 to a box. Now
That's nuts.
yes. Now at the time a few years ago, Tarmogoyfs were $200 a piece. That's $400 for a box that you could have bought at the time for $100.
Right.
So, or 110 or whatever it was, like that's a great deal. So people realized like, hey, we can make these Future Sight boxes more money. But again, go look for a Dragon's Maze box. Go look for a Gatecrash box. I don't know the exact numbers, but I would imagine they're pretty close to MSRP. Granted, Future Sight's a little bit older than Gatecrash, but some of the like Kamigawa boxes, I can't imagine that they're much more than $100, $200.
People are willing to take those risks and spend that money and save the product in the hopes that the price of it will end up going up, because ahead of time they don't know what cards in that set are going to wind up becoming big cards.
Right.
You mentioned Tarmogoyf before. That's the perfect example
Card
of
was
a
like
card that
$5,
nobody thought was going to be
$2.
worth a damn,
Mhm.
and now it's, a $200 card.
Again, not anymore, but
Well,
that's because
at
they've
one point
right.
it was a $200
Right.
card.
I mean, they reprinted it like 6 times, so that's
Well,
what happens.
That's a whole other thing.
Right, but that's
But-
right, and that's a different discussion. We're talking about Vorthos things here, but so in reference to the books, right? I am not an MTG finance guy. I am not a Magic historian. So please don't come to me if I've given you bad advice. But my initial reaction is do not buy like 10 of these books and sit on them for 15 years and go, these are going to be worth so much money. I
They
doubt
aren't.
it. Right. And especially because now Magic has finally gotten around to, with some of their older books, releasing audiobooks of them. Because guess what?
Thank God.
It's a digital copy and you can just buy that.
Thank God.
And you don't need the
Because-
book, you don't need to rebind books or reprint books. Just get it's just a piece of data.
But that's the thing, is that's what people respond to nowadays.
Mhm.
They don't respond to a novel,
Mhm.
and they don't spend money on something that they can just view online.
Yep.
If you sell an audiobook, people will buy it.
Mhm.
That's what people buy now. That's it.
And again, I do not know. I would have to assume that Ravnica novel will be released as an audiobook as well. I don't know that. I haven't seen it. If you have, let me know. But at this point, I mean, again, it's 2018. The book's coming out in 2019. How do you not have an audiobook version of it? And again, it very well could be something that they've announced and I missed it.
Or they might just be like, well, the book will cost more money when people buy it, so, that'll make us so much more money than selling an audiobook.
Right. And I can't imagine that that's the case. Like I said, I imagine an audiobook will be coming. I haven't heard anything about it, but that doesn't mean that it has not been discussed. Regardless, this is where we are now. We are now in a 5-week, 4-week holding pattern until the Guilds of Ravnica stories begin. We will have things to discuss. Maybe we will finally go back and talk about the Dominaria Magic Story podcasts that they did with Kelly Diggs and Ethan Fleischer, who were super fans of those things and creators of the current Dominaria set, the one that just came out 1 set ago. And so hopefully that will be something that we can delve a little bit further into and actually see fans of the Dominaria stories from the past using their love of the past stories to further their creation of the plane in the present. Mm-hmm. That would be a treat for us. And it would be great. And so I'm honestly looking forward to them. I'm looking forward, hopefully, to being completely lost. With listening to them, because I want them to go into such minute, obscure detail that I'm like, what the hell is happening? I want that. Because I want that to be something that I can pretend is still cared about, despite the fact that Kelly's not around anymore. And Ethan still is, to my knowledge. So hopefully that is how that works out. I think that it is interesting that this video is not part 3 of the Vivian Reed stories. I'm a little upset by that. But we will also see if, while there are no stories over these next 5 weeks, maybe there is something. Maybe there are more Magic Story podcasts. And again, if something came out on Wednesday and you're seeing this on Thursday and you're going, what the hell's Joe talking about? We may have filmed this before Wednesday.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, then ignore every time where I'm like, they aren't doing anything. Like if they announce something again, great, fine, thanks. Again, communication, and we talked about that. If they haven't, then fine. Then we're here and we're talking about it, and we'll come up with things to talk about over the next few weeks, because it's important to us to put these videos out. Again, not so that we can make money, but because this is what we do. We review things surrounding the Vorthos community, and we join all of you, hopefully, with your opinions and your thoughts and your comments in the comments section down below in showing off our
#Vorthos Pride.
And sometimes when we do that, it means that we're maybe a little passionate. Let us know what you thought of this. Do you agree with us? Do you disagree with us? Are we raving lunatics? Because that's totally a possibility. I feel that way sometimes.
Maybe you're annoyed that we came on here and decided to rant instead of giving you a real video.
I feel like some people enjoy the rants more so than the reviews. And if you're one of those people,
perhaps,
shout it out. Let us know. There is no shame in that.
Because they're sitting there going, hey, I'm not the only one who feels like this.
And again, I've said this
time and time again.
And I've said this many times, and I feel like every time I say it, it feels less genuine, but I assure you it's not. We don't make these to come on here and shit on the company. That's not why we do it. We do this, again, because we love the stories, but I feel like at the end of each of these, I feel so guilty because I'm like, what the hell are you doing? and then at the end of it, I'm like, I just sat here and just yelled at them for, for however many minutes, and it feels bad. It feels real bad because I'd much rather come out here and be like last video, like part 3 of the Vivian Reed stories. I was so happy I was just like, this was a great story, and this happened, to the point where I was like, I've been talking a lot. Do you want to say stuff? Because I really enjoyed it. And so, first of all, yes, shameless plug, but second of all, if you want to see the joy, the positive side of my hashtag Vorthos Pride, go watch the last video. It'll probably be popping up somewhere around here at the end. Go watch that, because you'll see the joy of reading a good story and what that does for us and our reviews, and you can contrast it with this. With us going, you put out a story on Wednesday and then another one on Friday, and then nothing the following Wednesday because reasons that you didn't talk about and you didn't tell us when they were coming out, because exclusivity in the modern internet age.
See, the problem is, I don't even think that it's really as bad as we feel like it is. I think that we were so spoiled before.
When they employed like 6 or 7 different people to write the stories for them.
They were so good, and they were part of the process of creating the worlds and the cards that the stories were based on. So it was so much easier for them to just blend into writing those stories and making them amazing, and making sure that there was consistency in when they came out and everything else. We just were so spoiled back then that now, when there's the tiniest little hiccup, which happens too often, I will say, but when there's the tiniest little hiccup, it's completely frustrating, because we know how good it could be.
And that's why I ask, if you feel like we are being whiny, please tell us. Because again, there, as Amy mentioned before, maybe there are some people who are coming here and going, yes, thank you, I'm not the only one. And maybe there are others of you who are coming here and going, please shut up.
This again.
Yeah. And I want to...
Because you go on Twitter and you scroll through, and all you see from all of your, magic, Twitter accounts that you follow is complaints about this. And then you go on Reddit and you see more complaints about this. And then you go,
more YouTube videos talking about it and stuff. And so that's why and podcasts and things like that. And so I want to know your opinions. I mean, to be fair, if you were pissed off by this topic, there's no way you listened this far into it, right? You would have turned this off a long time ago. But let us know. I mean, maybe you know of people who have said, like, no, I'm not going to watch that video. All they did was sit there and complain the whole time. Let us know, because we want to make sure that you guys are interested in this stuff as much as we are interested in discussing our feelings on it, because that's truly all it is. That's all it's ever been, right? It's Joe and Amy review, but it's Joe and Amy like give their opinions and review the story, right? Like it's not Joe and Amy give the Vorthos review. It's like, no, this is our opinions. We want the discussion with all of you so that we can hear other points, counterpoints, etc. Or just people like, again, it's super nice to go down into the comments and read, nope, Amy was right. And again, I read that.
Even if it doesn't get to be a back and forth conversation with you guys, which is really what we want, it's still great to just hear from you.
Yeah. And give us your opinion so that we can read it, go, wow, that's so cool. Click the like button on your comment and then move on, because we, a lot of times, are not able to add to the greatness that is your comments and your thoughts, because what are we going to add? Just to go, yeah, you're right. Like, okay, cool, that's what the like button's for. You know what I mean?
But that's why we also try to respond and say, great point, or, that's really amazing. Here's what that makes me think of, or something like that. Because even if we're not really elaborating on what it is you said, we're still telling you thank you so much for having written it. Because, like I said, what we want is a back and forth conversation. But even if it doesn't get to be that, it's still, we're part of the same community. And so, in order for us to really be part of that community, we have to be somewhat in tune with the rest of the community. I mean, that's That's what being part of a community is. So if we're just making these videos and not a soul comments on them, then what's the point? Right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so what if people are watching them if they can't have anything to say after having watched them? What is it doing? What
Right.
good is it contributing?
And I mean, the cool thing is also to be able, like, at least for me, to be able to go to an LGS at a pre-release and talk to people about the stories and talk about maybe our videos, if people watch our videos, or just in general, like giving the opinions that I've been giving here to someone who doesn't watch our videos, but and maybe isn't even aware of the stories, right? They don't read them,
Yeah.
they just play Magic. And so I can say, like, no, yeah, like, super interested to see what's going on with Raul Zarek now because of what we know, but like,
Right.
but also being like, oh man, yeah, the Dominaria stories really slipped up. It was real inconsistent, and it didn't really track with the Ixalan stories, and I don't like complaining like that, but I do like kind of bringing those thoughts and opinions to people who don't read the stories as much. And maybe you have those kinds of experiences too, where you go to your LGS and you're like, oh my god, the Vivian Reed stories were so cool, she's such a great character. And people are like, oh, did she have a story? Okay, that's cool.
Right.
Like, you know, and
They
so
were
you
like,
get to...
Vivian Reed who?
Well, again, hopefully they know the card, at least from M19.
But if it wasn't significant enough to them in their gameplay, that might be their answer.
It's true. So, I think... Do you have anything else, at least right now?
I think we've said enough.
Yeah, we've got a few more weeks of this. Again, unless more has come out that we are not aware of yet, this is kind of where we live.
We'll start checking around, and we'll do some investigative work and see what we can find and come up with some at least some topics.
Well, like I said, the Magic Story podcasts are totally a thing I want to get into. So if there's literal nothing, that's what we'll be talking about next week. If there are some things, we will make that decision, and we will get back to you next week with that video, and you'll see what we're talking about. One, the other, both. So I want to thank you for watching this episode of JaAR here on Geek for All, where we talked about things. Things were sure talked about this week.
Show off our Vorthos pride.
So thank you guys so much, sincerely, for watching, for commenting, for liking, for sharing. Yes. Seriously, genuinely, all that good stuff, for subscribing. It helps a lot. Yes. So, like I said, this has been another episode of JaAR here on Geek for All. I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
One way or another, we will see you guys next week. And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.